Hello and welcome to Writing Today. In this episode, we're going to be talking about how to write nonfiction, mastering the art of true storytelling. Now, I've talked a lot about the different genres in fiction, but it's now time to address nonfiction and give you some practical methods on how to write it effectively. As always, you can read this blog post on my website, thepensedsleuth.com. There's a link to that in the description below. And if you're interested in some more premium writing education, I also have a coaching program for writers looking to improve their writing, as well as a library of writing courses for you to enjoy. That is the Writer's Workshop, and there is a link to that in the description as well. With that said, let's talk about how to write nonfiction, starting first with picking your story. When it comes to writing nonfiction, choosing the right story is crucial. There are many factors to consider, such as your personal interests and expertise, the potential audience for your story, and the impact that your story might have. And you want to choose a story that you are passionate about, as this will help you stay motivated and engaged throughout the writing process. At the same time, you should also think about your audience and what they might be interested in. Are there any topics or themes that are currently popular, perhaps even relevant in the news or your country? If you are a business-oriented writer, this is something truly important to understand, especially if you want to make sure that your nonfiction is a hit. And in terms of the story, you've got to think about the impact that you want to have on the audience. There are some nonfiction writers who simply want their audience to think about an issue or topic a bit more deeply. Then there are nonfiction writers who want their readers to take action and take notice of something. Or nonfiction writers who want to inspire their readers with a true story about someone who did something amazing. It's not just about writing an engaging and compelling story. It's also about writing something that's meaningful and impactful. And as with writing normal fiction, I would ask you the question, are you writing a story for yourself or for a specific audience? As this can dictate the entire writing process. There are certainly many stages in the writing process that will be affected if you are writing a story for yourself or for an audience that needs additional research. Of course, it does become a lot more personal if the story itself is a personal story to you. If you are writing about your experience of something, then it's all about how you felt and what conclusions you make when writing the story. And this will allow you to insert your personality into the story as well, which will help make it a lot more unique and engaging. Now that you've chosen your story, it's time to craft a compelling narrative. Nonfiction may be rooted in reality, but that doesn't mean it has to be dry or boring. The key is to find the narrative thread that will engage your readers and keep them reading. This sometimes comes down to understanding your reader and what they want to read. One effective technique is to treat your nonfiction like fiction. This means using many of the storytelling elements that make fiction so engaging, like plot, character development, and setting. By weaving together these elements, you can create a narrative that reads like a gripping story, even if it's all true. So if you are a fiction writer, you are well equipped to use this method to tackle nonfiction. One of the biggest issues, though, that comes from writing a nonfiction story is pacing. Seeing as this is based in reality and you are doing your research, you should be flooded with details. But as a writer, it is your job to exclude the unnecessary details in order to maintain a certain pacing. The last thing you want is for the reader to be bogged down in the details and not enjoy the meaning behind the story itself. If there are some details that you feel necessary to include, it's all about spacing them out and maintaining that momentum, because you don't want to break the flow of your story, even in nonfiction. It's what makes something so engaging. It's what gets the reader invested. And the last thing they want to do is to read a story about someone who did something amazing, and then spend a chapter or two bogged down on analytical details that they may need to know, but at the same time, it does tend to dampen the story a bit. Another important factor is that most nonfiction is written with empathy and compassion. The readers want to feel like they're experiencing that situation alongside the subject matter, whether it be you or someone important. And the best way to do this is to convey the emotions that are felt by the characters. So that means you need to tap into your own personal emotions if you are the subject matter or were present, or into the emotions of the people that you're writing about. By doing this, you'll build a greater connection with the reader, and the story will be a lot more investing to them. And that does bring us to using vivid details and dialogue to help create that feeling. And you would use it the same way as you used it in fiction. First off, vivid details are the key to making your story more engaging and interesting to readers. When you're describing a scene or situation, don't be afraid to get specific and use sensory language that helps readers visualize what's happening. For example, instead of saying it was a nice day, describe the warmth of the sun, the sounds of birds chirping, and the scent of freshly cut grass. Do your best to set the scene, and sometimes that means going into more detail if the chapter is in a different time period, in which case you'll need to explain the details about that time period in order to establish the societal atmosphere. There are so many ways you can create an ambience, a feeling to your story from the facts that you have collected. Similarly, the dialogue between characters can also add to the atmosphere. And this means you'll create more realistic dialogue as well, especially if you have audio recordings or video footage. The benefit of writing a nonfiction is that it's based in reality, and if you have access to files or even recall the dialogue that well, you can convey a natural conversation with ease. Of course, if you don't have access to recordings and your memory isn't so great, then it might be best to come up with a dialogue that best fits the narrative. In which case, you'll need to make use of one method I always recommend when writing dialogue, and that is simply reading the dialogue out loud. The reason I always recommend this is because sometimes our ears do a better job of spotting weaker or awkward speech than our eyes do. If you make proper use of these sensory details and introduce some natural dialogue here and there, you should have no problem immersing the reader in the story. Now, when writing nonfiction, it's important to remember that you're dealing with real people and events, so accuracy is key. However, that doesn't mean your writing has to be so straightforward and boring either. You can still use creative techniques to engage your readers while staying true to the facts. One way to do this is by using descriptive language to paint vivid pictures of the setting and characters. The use of sensory details I mentioned in the previous point will help give that feeling. You can also incorporate present-day dialogue into your writing, commentary from real people on those events and other people in the story. These comments can add a lot to the feeling, as it helps remind the reader that this is a story but also something that inspires conversation or insight on these events. Such comments will help you break up the story and hint at the results that followed. It can also help the reader better understand the emotions that those people felt at the time. And let's not forget, another great way to add a unique twist to the writing is to use your own writing style. Provide your own personality to the project. It could be as simple as changing up the tone of the story. Perhaps you write it in a humorous tone, or perhaps you provide your own insight on those events. But this is all about balancing your creativity with the facts. So be sure in doing so that you don't sacrifice the accuracy of your story as well. Double check your facts and sources, and certainly don't try to exaggerate events or scenes in order to make them more interesting. Most nonfiction readers enjoy the grittiness of reality, which is why the genre is so popular. Believability is what's important in nonfiction, not just the story itself. But by all means, since you have the creative freedom to do so, you can fill in the gaps with your imagination. Editing and revising your nonfiction work is just as important as writing it. After you've completed your first draft, take a break for a few days so you can come back to it with fresh eyes. Once you're ready to begin the revision process, read through your work and make note of any areas that need improvement. Look for ways to tighten up your sentences and make them more concise. Check for accuracy in your facts and statistics, and make sure that your writing flows logically from one point to the next. Get feedback from others and be open to constructive criticism, especially if you are writing a story about someone else. You can also read your work out loud, as I said earlier, and have an easier time catching any awkward phrasing or errors that you might have missed. And remember, this is a writing process like any other, so it may take several rounds before your product reaches its final form. And certainly don't be afraid to make changes, even if it means cutting out large portions of your story. The goal here is to create the best possible version of your story until you are satisfied. If you keep all of these methods in mind, from choosing your story to the editing and revising of it, you should have no problem in creating an engaging story for the readers to enjoy. Use the methods that you picked up when writing fiction as well, as they can help you convey information in a lot more enjoyable way than simply just providing cold facts. And if you know how to balance your creativity with these facts, you should have no problem creating a story that gets the reader invested, but also informed. And now time for my thoughts and my experience with this genre. Now, my experience of nonfiction is kind of a basic one. I tend to write educational content. I write blog posts, I create these YouTube videos, I also write courses and books on writing and various other subjects that I teach. So my goal really when it comes to nonfiction is condensing a lot of information down into practical methods that beginners can use. If there's anything that I would personally add to the methods I've already discussed, it's that nonfiction should be actually a little easier than writing fiction. Because if you do your research, you should have all the content you need. It's all about bundling it together and presenting it in an engaging way. You want the reader to enjoy what you have, and at the same time you want them to be informed as well. When it comes to fiction, you have to worry about all of that, and at the same time your imagination needs to construct the content itself. If you're having a creative block one day, then that progress is suddenly stopped until you can get back into the swing of things. With nonfiction, we have all the information we could ever need to create something at our fingertips. And if we're writing something for ourselves or about someone else, you still have a source of information that you can go to, whether it be that person or people they know, or perhaps historical documents and entries online that you can use to help bolster your research. So if you're struggling to make progress in your nonfiction book, then I don't think the problem would be your writing style. It most likely might be your research. And it's all about getting that additional research that will help you get back on track. Of course, if you're an experienced nonfiction writer, what advice would you give beginner writers when tackling this genre? What is the biggest obstacle you face when writing nonfiction? Please let us know in the comments below. If you want to see more of my content and work, you can find it on thepensleuth.com. And if you're interested in some premium writing content, there is the link to the Writer's Workshop as well. But for the writers who want to check out my teaching methods first, there's also a link to a free writing course. If you're planning to start writing a fantasy book, this course is all about fantasy world building. So if you're struggling to set the scene or create a world space that is interesting to a reader, I recommend checking that course out. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, good day, good night, and happy writing.